Who was the captain of the USS Enterprise, NCC 1701C? A. Richard Castillo. B. Rachel Garrett. C. Tasha Yar. Or D. John Harriman? Because he's talking a lot doesn't mean anything.
Our viewers have learned to not respect Eric's opinion.
All right, welcome to a piece of the action. My name is Micah.
My name's Eric.
And I'm Greg.
And today we are going to be talking about the game City of the Big Shoulders. This game is a fairly new game, I think, out in 2019, it says, and by Raymond Chandler III, 2 to 4 players, and running time of 2 to 3 hours. So I'm pretty excited to hear about this because I know absolutely nothing about this game. But Greg and Eric will fill us in. Before we get started, if you like what we're doing here, leave us a comment and let us know what you like or what you'd like to see more of. But now let's go ahead and get into City of the Big Shoulders. So, like I said, I don't know anything about this game. Greg, tell me, what is City of the Big Shoulders about? And in broad strokes, how do you play it?
So this is based in Chicago, starting from 1875, so not long after the Great Chicago Fire, up until 1915, which is around, the Great Depression is about to begin, that era. So you're playing through 5 decades of Chicago. So basically you're playing an entrepreneur that's rebuilding Chicago. This is represented in, if I were to describe how this game plays, it's basically take an 18xx stock market, throw on a worker placement where you choose the buildings, maybe somewhat like Kalis, and then throw in dashes of Arkwright. Their appeal system.
Got all that, Micah?
You throw all that together.
Three games that we have not covered and I have not played. Thank you.
So basically,
yeah,
the way it works as an entrepreneur is you're buying the first round, the first phase of each round, 5 decades. So the first phase of each decade, you are buying and selling stocks, shares in companies, which are actually represented by actual companies from the history of Chicago, which is kind of interesting. So that's the first round. You buy and sell shares in these companies. If you have the most shares in a company, you become the president. I forgot what the game calls them here, but you become the president of that company. And then we move on to the next phase where you have building tiles in your hand because you're rebuilding Chicago. You put a building, each player is going to be putting buildings onto the board that you'll then take your partners, they call them in this game, although they're basically just workers, to take these actions. And through those actions, you're going to be basically improving your companies, the ones that you're owning in different ways. And then when you're done with all of that, you move into kind of an operating round where your companies now try to produce goods and sell them. And they do that by collecting resources, turning that into goods, taking those goods and fulfilling contracts. And then they make money and they will pay back out to the investors, the people that have stocks in that company. That's the basic, that's a really, really slimmed down version of the rules. But as you play through all 5 decades, at the end, whoever has the most personal money in the companies don't matter. This is kind of, actually, I should probably explain that since not everyone's familiar with 18xx. Every company actually, when you buy stocks, money goes into the company. And one important concept of this game is your personal money is different than the money of the companies. The companies will be spending money to improve themselves, but that money doesn't mean anything to you at the end of the game. The only money that matters is the money you have in your own personal pocket and the money that you have invested in stocks. So you're trying to figure out a way to to use these companies in a way so that you're getting money back to yourself because the money that's in the company doesn't mean anything. So that's the basic idea in a nutshell.
Okay. Like I mentioned, it said that I think BGG gave this a 4.05 out of 5 for complexity. Does it feel like a laboriously heavy game with all of that transactional stuff going on?
Yeah, it's a pretty heavy game, I would say.
I think that's a little high. that's a tad high for what I would say.
Okay.
I don't think it would crest 4 for me as far as
Okay.
the complexity.
Okay. Well, Eric, why don't you talk to us then about the theme, how well you feel that it does on executing on that. Again, kind of like, in a way, kind of like Sekigahara last time, seems to be built around a central idea of a historical period and historical
It's
cross
focused
section.
on something specific. And about the play, also, I want to mention that just my own take on it, I felt like it played very fast. Like when your turns came, the turns seemed to move by at a good clip. Just as an aside before we move into theme, but with the theme, as Greg said, it's very thematic. There's Chicago Fire from 1871. Hundreds of people died in it, but right after that was this big push to reinvigorate Chicago, and that lasted for many, many years. Actually, I looked some information up on this, and it turns out that 20 years after the fire, in roughly somewhere around 1890, Chicago was second in population only to New York City. So like it took off. So Chicago was huge. And in that you don't just play something ambiguous, you play like a wealthy businessman who is rebuilding parts of Chicago and also starting companies and investing in companies. And so it's very specific. And the other thing I want to say about is this thematic? I don't know if this is theme so much. It kind of deals with the kind of play or the feel of play. I hate the term semi-co-op. I really don't like the term semi-co-op. Because
Why do you hate the term
like,
semi-co-op?
I don't like it because I feel like it leaves potential buyers confused as to what they will be doing in the game. So to be specific, all stock games have an aspect where you can potentially want other players to do well right up until the end, because you want their companies to make money, because you have stocks in their company. And that alone kind of makes the vibe of this game a little different. Now, if you're familiar with 18xx games, you know what that's all about. I am not. I have never played an 18xx game, but I have played other stock games, and I'm terrible at them, by the way. But yeah, there's an interesting thing that happens in stock games where you don't have to play this way, but you can play nice, and you can want the other players to do well. And I just think that's that's a really cool addition to the game. So that's more of a feel of play thing. But thematically, yes, this game does a really good job. I would say that for me, art is important in theme, and this game's art is extremely minimal. So there's not much in the way of eye candy to look at. The art that's there is nice. It's specific. The fonts that were even used as there's some weird stuff on the numbers and letters. Some of them are like double hit, like as though the
typewriter got jammed or something.
The typewriter hit twice. Yeah.
Right.
And they did that on purpose. It looks like a mistake, but they actually did that on purpose. So there's a lot of thought that went into it, but it's not terribly doesn't jump off the table.
Okay. All right. Well, let's talk about feel of play then. In addition to that, Erica, did you have anything more that you wanted to say about that in particular, or if not, Greg, you want to tell us from your point of view, how does it feel to play City of the Big Shoulders?
I do think it's a pretty dense and thinky game. I think this is the kind of game that will require multiple plays before it all starts to click. So there's that. I do think this is a fairly heavy game. Maybe between medium heavy and heavy. I don't know. It's up. Maybe four sounds about right to me, to be honest with you. It does feel pretty dense. The interaction in it is pretty there. I mean, I think it is going to be dependent on your group and how dependent on how willing your group is to exploit the stock market. You could play with I think if you play with a bunch of mean players or maybe even expert players, I think this game could seem a lot more interactive than if you played with people who are just not really trashing people's stocks and things of that nature. So there's that. And it just feels like there's a lot of systems in this game that you're just constantly juggling and having to think between. So yeah, it's a pretty hefty game, I think, and interactive.
Okay. Let me ask you this. So along with it being heavy, two things that I always worry about when I see that that a game is going to be heavy is, does it lend itself to a lot of analysis paralysis? And also, do you end up sitting there waiting a long time for your turn to come around because other people are suffering from analysis paralysis? Does that sort of thing happen, or does it? Eric said it clicked right along. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to bring this up in the good section, but yeah, I do think it's a pretty zippy game, actually. I think it moves along pretty fast. I mean, obviously, there's going to be some moments, especially when you're thinking about starting a company or something, where someone's going to go, "Hold on, I got to think this through."
Yeah,
that of course is going to happen. But yeah, I thought this game clipped along pretty good.
Okay.
I never felt that I was waiting too long.
Does that running time though sound right to you? What was it, 2 to 3 hours?
2 to 3 hours.
Okay.
Yeah, and to speak on the player count too, I played all 3 player counts. I do think it's better at, probably 4 is the best, but 3 is pretty close. But I was surprised at how well 2 went, actually. I didn't usually stock market games don't work well at 2, and I wouldn't. It was easy the weakest of the 3, but I was still a good game at 2. So.
Okay, well, let's go ahead and get into talking about priorities and strategies. What are some things that you might want to know going into your first game of City of the Big Shoulders? If you have not played before, what do you guys think? Greg, why don't you start us off?
Yeah, so this is where things are going to fall apart, because this is a big game. It's hard for me to so again, just to reiterate, I'm not giving expert strategy. This is just, if you're brand new and you're like, I don't know what to do, this is confusing, these are some things that I think you could look at. I think the more I played this game, the more I realized how essential the appeal track was. And I think that's my first big tip. The appeal track is big. It seems big to me. So the appeal track, since we haven't talked about it yet, is basically it determines the turn order of when your companies run, and that it matters because when you buy resources from the market, you want first dibs at that, because if you're later on, someone could buy out your goods and they're not available to you in such a way. So that's important. But also, as you move up the appeal track, there's these bonuses as you hit certain marks. So I feel like getting first turn order is pretty big, because then you get the resources you want easier. But also, it really allows you to mess with the people behind you, because there's no limits. I can buy all the resources I have money for. So if I see that Eric needs pink cubes, I could just buy the pink cubes up just to prevent him from getting it. So that's a lot of power. But then on top of that being pretty good, the appeal track has all these bonuses on it. And those bonuses are pretty powerful. And on top of it, it's one of the places where you get your extra workers. So you start with 2 workers, you can go up to 5, and there's different ways to get your other 3 workers unlocked. And one of them is getting a company up the appeal track high enough. And you definitely want to go for that. You want to go for the extra workers. So the appeal track just seems like a good place to go. And it's also hard to catch up on the appeal track when you get behind. I've noticed. There's no way you can just zoom up. So don't, you want to fight. You want to fight. That's a fight you want on the appeal track. Get up high on that. Beyond that, I think when you first come into this game, knowing what company to open can be a little overwhelming. So here's kind of my tips on that. So then another way to get your worker is if you run all the factories in your company. So there's some companies that have very easy to fill factories. In order to run your factories, you got to hire workers for them and fill them up. There's a couple companies that only need a few workers. So you can get your extra worker pretty quick off your first company. So those are always nice to go for. Beyond that, there's end game bonuses. So like, for example, whoever has the most workers gets $200 at the end of the game. Whoever has the most salespeople gets $200 at the end of the game. So I would say, on top of on your first company, trying to get your extra worker unlocked, also be looking at the end game bonuses and seeing, well, this company here has a lot of automation spots, and end game bonus is automation spots. So maybe I'll prioritize that a little higher. So there's just some things to think about on your first game. There's a lot more to it, of course.
Okay. Eric, anything you want to add for priorities and strategies that Greg didn't cover?
Oh yeah, I've got lots to say, and take it all with a huge grain of salt, because as I mentioned, I'm not good at stock games, but did notice some things. First off, I want to say there's so many things you can try to do in this game that there's way too much to cover. So we're talking about, there's managers. You can hire salespeople to raise the value of your goods that you sell. There's trying to diversify or specialize in a particular type of good that no one else has. There's strategies about stock trashing. You can play mean. Greg mentioned a one way to do that, where you kind of aggro spite purchase the resources that someone else needs. Versus the opposite, which is helping them, leaving something for them, making sure that they have enough to run their company so that your stock goes up, that you have purchased in their company. There's so many different things. The appeal track, like Greg said, that's a whole nother thing. That represents how likable your company is. So there's tons of different levers to pull on this. Way too much to go into. Here are some things that I think you should think about, at least consider, when you're just jumping in to City of the Big Shoulders. I would suggest choosing a starting company that has an asset space on it, because those asset spaces, you can use them every round, and they're usually pretty powerful. And sometimes they just give you free resources, or even better things sometimes. So when you're choosing your company, choose something that has a space for an asset. What are they called, Greg? They're called something assets, capital assets.
Yeah, I think those are called capital assets. You know what's interesting about those two, just to add to that, they also, one thing don't overlook is they also give you something when you buy them.
Yes.
They give you something every turn, just like you kind of like use them once a turn, but they also, when you buy them, they give you something, and they're pretty good stuff. And I've bought those capital assets just to get the perk.
Just for that thing. Yeah, that's a good point.
Just for that thing, because it's the only good way to get it, and then the next round
it might
buy
be
another
cheaper
one,
depending on what's going on. Maybe workers are really, maybe employees are really, really expensive right now. It might be cheaper to get the capital asset that gives you a free worker and this other thing. So just keep that in mind. I would consider using your first turn to quickly bump up your company's stock, your one company that you have, your one company's stock price, and then sell 2 shares of it in order to give yourself a big burst of money for round 2. That might not always be the right thing to do, but I've seen other people doing it, and I think that it might be a good thing to consider. You'll hurt your company's stock price in the short term, but you'll give yourself the manager so much more money to work with starting round 2. It kind of gives you a bonus, I think. However, in round 2, this is my third tip. In round 2, you want to make sure that your company gets over that $50 share marker. It's $50, right, Greg? There's a cap where at a certain point you can't go. When you do really good, when your company produces makes a lot of money, your stock goes up a certain number of levels based on some math. But if you're below that $50 per share price, you can only ever go up 1 or 2 spaces. Whereas when you're after that, you can go up by 3. So you want to get over that hump as soon as possible.
Oh, it accelerates once you get over.
It accelerates it. So you want to get that, and there's only 5 rounds in the game, so you want to make sure you get over that real quick. Fourth, try and get your factories as self-sufficient as possible. Capital assets help. Buildings help, making sure that you have the right buildings out there so that you can get the resources you need. You want them to be as self-sufficient as possible. If you can't do that, then you definitely want to make sure that you are high in prestige so that you can take resources first, because your opponent can swipe them from you. So there's ways to make your factories kind of run themselves to a certain extent, but you can't always do that. So if you can't, then make sure you have the prestige that Greg was talking about so that you're not going to get messed up on resources. Then try and this is a general tip. I think these last two tips are, if you don't want to do those specific things, just try and get these last ones in. As a general rule, try and run your personal money as low as possible during the game, because your personal money is useless. If it's just sitting around, it's not making any money. So you want that money to be in stocks, or or you got to have a plan for it at least. Don't be hanging on to a bunch of personal money. And finally, by the end of the game, you should be shooting for a full complement of stocks by the end. And you should also remember that buying stocks near the end of the game is statistically less likely to make or lose you money than earlier in the game. So you want to buy stocks earlier if possible, so that they have a chance to grow. Buying stocks later in the game is good, but it's not as good as having the money to buy them earlier. So that's a lot to take in, but those are my super newbie tips.
It's interesting. A lot of what you said, it reminds me of stuff that I think actually applies to the actual stock market and things like, in the way companies work, right?
It's so thematic. You're right.
Like, I think Amazon has never been profitable. Like, they've never claimed to profit, and it's because they always take all the money they make and they invest it back in themselves, in R&D and stuff like that. And, it's a large part of why that's the case. It's kind of like what you said about, just cash out your own stock to put back into yourself and that kind of thing. And so some
I think
emergent properties there.
Yeah, I think you could learn a lot from this game, as far as just general stock market. I think it'd be it's kind of educational. I think actually I think it's considered an educational game on BGG. There's the educational tag on it.
Yeah, it kind of sounds like it, right? Okay, now let's go ahead and get into what Eric and Greg liked and did not like about City of the Big Shoulders, with the good and the bad. We'll begin with the good, and we'll begin with Greg. What did you like?
So this took me a while to break apart. My views can change on this immensely over time. I'll give my thoughts right now. But this is a good thing, right? It's a game that I don't feel like I've fully explored, because I do feel like it's a rather opaque game. So this is not a game that I'm like, okay, I see what this game is doing. There's nothing left to be done. There's a lot of layers here that I still feel like I need to unwrap. So, but it's good from the get-go too. It's opaque, but I do feel like it still makes sense even on the first play. So I just feel like there's a lot of room to run here yet. So I don't know where my taste of this game are going to go in the coming years, but it's good. It's opaque. I like that. There's just a lot to think about during the game. Anything that's this dense is just going to interest me. And the talk about the stock market and stuff like that, I mean, this is kind of my wheelhouse anyways. Like any of these economic Euro games, I'm always down for. So that's got plenty of that in it. I do want to talk about that bar that Eric talked about between the 50 and 60. I just think that's an interesting mechanism, because not only, of course, you want to get above it, but also trying to knock the other players below that, because you could hurt them by a significant amount, because now they can't do a triple jump. They can only do a double jump. So there's a thing in this game where you can like stock dump, where you can buy stocks in a company and then immediately sell them, and it causes the stock market to go down. This is normal on like 18xx, but it's always it's fun to do that in general. So learning how to like manipulate the stock market in that way, so that you can prevent other players from jumping above that bar, I just thought that was kind of fun. It is interactive. It's I would say medium-ish, maybe a little above medium-ish interactivity here for my range. So I do like that. The market is interesting. I do like the whole thinking of how can I make it so the next person coming up can't get the goods they want, because if you can prevent a company from running, that's a huge hit. So it's a fun little puzzle to figure out, like, okay, how do I want to get ahead in the appeal track so that I can trash their company so they can't buy the goods. In addition, you can trash companies through the stock dumping, which I enjoy. You can get a company onto its last dollar and then dump that company on someone by selling. If they have like 4 shares of your company and you just sell off all yours, now there's the president. Hey, deal with it. That's always fun. I don't think this game has it as much as 18xx does, but there's some of that in here. Anyways, all of that together just makes for an interesting interactive game with a lot of layers to think through. So yeah, I mean, it's a good game. I really enjoy it. And as I mentioned earlier, it's a zippy game. I was actually surprised how fast this game moves. It's only 5 turns, which when I first saw that, I was like, man, that doesn't seem like a lot. But you do feel like you play a full game. But the action turns is fast. So yeah, it's good. Good game.
All right, sounds like a lot there. Very nice. Eric, what did you like about City of the Big Shoulders?
I liked it a lot. I think that, like I said, I am not an economic game guy. I usually go into heavier economic games thinking, all right, I gotta put on my happy face here because I'm going to have a rough time. But everything about this game clicked for me. I think this is the first time I've played an economic game where I was like, oh yeah, I get it. I understand what's going on. That's not to say that I'm good at it, and it's not to say that there's nothing to discover. Like I've solved City of the Big Shoulders. One of the good things about City of the Big Shoulders, going along with what Greg said, is that it feels very chaosy. You know, like which way is the water drop going to run down my hand, kind of thing from Jurassic Park. You know.
See, here I'm now by myself, talking to myself. That's chaos theory.
He would get a kick out of this game because there's so many different. One little thing. I was trying to describe.
What's a little butterfly effect stuff?
It's very butterfly effecty. Yeah, I was trying to describe like one of the reasons I lost to my wife, and she said, "Well, what if you had done something else differently? Like, would that have made it so you could do this thing in the end?" And I was like, "No, because if I had made that choice 3 turns back, everything would be different.
We'd be in a different universe.
Totally different universe. Yeah. So, and usually I find myself in the darkest timeline when when I play economic games.
But, yeah, no, that's a good point. There's just that's why it makes this game so much to explore. It feels like
yeah,
you want to go back and do it again because like, what would happen if I do this? I'm gonna do this because it does create very divergent paths.
But it never feels like I don't know why that happened. You know, you can always trace it back, but the sample size of possible universes is too big to grok in one go. You know, so there's just so much fun to be had, I think, with a game that is understandable. I know what the prestige track does. I know what the buildings do. I know what how they work together. But you know, making that turn into a successful game is a fun challenge, and it also feels like I'm running a business. It feels very thematic. I wanted to compare this to another heavy game that I'm not so fond of, Food Chain Magnate. And one of the reasons I don't like Food Chain Magnate is 2 reasons. I don't like it because it doesn't feel like there's any tactical element to the game, and the process. I was thinking about this during playing City of the Big Shoulders. With Food Chain Magnate, the process of calculating my potential sales by tracing imaginary routes on the map, I find that tedious. I think that's really what it comes down to for me. I find that process of being like, okay, how far away is that house from my restaurant? It's all imaginary lines, and I find that very tedious. But that is completely gone in this game. So you can have in this game a big victory in one part of the game, kind of tactically. You know, you can have a big round and still, you know, not win. And I find that illuminating. I think, okay, that round was good. I succeeded there. Maybe I can try to push that to a complete win next time I play. That's much more interesting to me than the kind of feeling that I get out of Food Chain Magnate.
Okay. All right. Well, Greg, those are fighting words. He's besmirched your beloved Food Chain Magnate.
I know.
So would you like to respond to that? And what let's also talk about what you guys didn't. Why don't you go ahead and tell us what you didn't like as well about City of the Big Shoulders?
Okay, well, I mean, I don't need to respond to it. I think our viewers have learned to not respect Eric's opinions by this, up to this point.
Yeah, that is a good point. Yeah.
Don't worry. I'll put in time skips so you can skip his stuff. No. So, all right, bad. Okay. I got a lot to say here, and I have a bit of preamble here. So, this game, man. Out of all, it was our 26th game, I think.
Correct.
Out of all the games we played, this is by far was the hardest for me to get my thoughts composed on. Like, I had to play this a bunch, and I had to think about this a lot for me to break apart what I was going to say here. And the one thing I want to emphasize here is I think this is a good game, even a very good game, but it's not a great game for me. And this is what took me so long to figure out, because this is in my wheelhouse. I do like heavy economic games, but I had to sit and figure out, well, what is separating this from what I do think are great economic games, like 18xx, which I do love playing, Food Chain Magnate, which is great, Age of Steam, or Chicago Express, or even Power Grid. You know, it's a very light economic game, but I like all those games better than this. And I had to figure out, well, what is it that's preventing this from reaching that upper level? So it's a very good game, not great. So I'm going to say a lot here because I couldn't pin it on one thing. It's a combination of a bunch of things that all together in totality knocks it down a peg. But just because I'm talking a lot here doesn't mean I hate the game. So I just want to emphasize that. The other little piece of
In
preamble
fact, just because
here,
he's talking a lot doesn't mean anything. So
that's true, actually. That is true. You can ignore all of my opinions. All right, second part of my preamble, because this is not exactly talking about the game itself, but what I actually think is my biggest problem with this game is a meta reason. Though the thing I think is the biggest negative of this game is that it markets itself as an 18xx. And I just want to address this now. This is not an 18xx game. And I'm only saying this because if you are a person who enjoys 18xx, and you've heard, and here's the thing, this game markets itself this way. It's all written all throughout the rule book that it references 18xx the entire time. One of the alternate titles for this game is Chicago 1875. It pushes it. Like, I've heard people say, this is 18xx evolved. It's not. If you like 18xx and you're coming in because you've heard that, you're going to be disappointed. Okay? And I also don't think it's a good introduction to 18xx. I'll give you some alternatives in my final thoughts. Anyways, let's just get that out of the way. This is an economic Euro game with some 18xx coloring on the side. All right, so let's go to the actual mechanisms of the game, because I enjoyed this much more when I approached it as just a kind of an engine buildy economic Euro game, right? So let's talk about it trying to be an 18xx. Yes, it has an 18xx stock market, but what it's removing is operating of trains. Now, if you ever, I'm gonna say 18xx, but let's just stick with 1830 because that's kind of like the baseline. In 1830, when you run your companies, it's very simple. You run track, you build track or upgrade track. You possibly put up tokens, which allows you to run your trains from new places, or more importantly, block people from entering certain cities. You buy trains that get sequentially better. That is also kind of the timer of the game, and you just kind of count up how many cities you can reach, and that's the money you get. You pay it out to your investors, or you keep it to the company. That's it. It's a very simple system, and through that system, you get a ton of interaction. It's incredibly cutthroat. If you play 18xx, you know when I talk about the train rush. So it's very simple. You get all this very simple system, and you get all of this benefits. So this game takes that out, and it puts in this whole worker placement thing. It puts in these buildings you do. You got this uphill track now. The companies now have to buy resources, and they're moving them into goods, and you're filling these contracts. And I don't think it's returning something more, right? I think, in fact, it's a little less cutthroat. It's also a little less deep to me. It seems that way. So I feel like it's adding a lot of new rules, but I'm not getting anything out of it. It's just getting a little more fiddly. I mean, here's an example. So the game has 3 turn orders tracks. So in 1830, you have, of course, you buy stocks, you go around the table, and then your companies, based upon where they are in the stock market, will run in that order. Well, this game says, well, forget where you are in the stock market. We have this appeal track we're going to add in. Now you got to have that. That's the order your company's going to run in. And there's a third turn order for how you place your workers. So there's 3 turn orders you have to juggle. It just feels a little unnecessarily complex. And then let's talk about the stock market a little bit. And I'm going to use an analogy here. This time I'll go with programming analogy because that's what I do in my day job. But I think you'll understand it if you know program. So sometimes, like let's say you're working on an app and needs some functionality, right? And you can go online and go, hey, here's a library I can just import. And it's got all the functionality I need. I'll just use that. But then when you look at it, you realize, okay, but there's a lot of other stuff in here I don't need. It's just kind of like bloating my code a little bit. But you live in a world of managers that don't understand things and wanted things yesterday. So you're like, well, I'll let it ride. That's kind of how it feels like to me, the stock market. I kind of feel like they just want import, and specifically 1846, import 1846 stock market, bloop, done. When I think it could have been a lot cleaner. Like I'll give you an example. Like for example, you can withhold funds. Instead of paying out funds to investors, you can withhold funds. And the reason you may want to do that is because your company's doesn't have the money it needs, but it drops your stock value. I never felt the need to do that in this game. My company's always flush with cash. And I don't know, it just felt like there's all this stuff going on that I didn't feel like it needed. And I just had to think to myself, could this have been like a Chicago Express style stock market? Anyways, that all that together just feels messier, and I'm not getting stuff out of it. And that's what I like about things like 18XX, Food Chain Magnate, Age of Steam, Chicago Express, Power Grid. They feel like very elegant systems that I'm getting a lot of bang for the buck out of. The depth is not coming from juggling systems. The depth is applying those systems, right? If you think about it, it's like you got a program that you paint stuff with on your computer. But before you can start painting with it, you have to learn how all the tools work. And that's where complexity is coming from the beginning. And once you get there, sure, you know how to do tools. Or you just get a paint set and you're like, hey, I kind of know how this works. I can just start painting. Right? That's kind of how it is. It's like this game is like you got to learn all these tools first before you can actually get to the point where you're applying it. Whereas these other games, I feel like the rules are very intuitive and you can just start getting to the good stuff immediately. Also, let's talk about the end game goals. So there's these end game goals in this game where it says, hey, if you have the most stock people, you'll get 200, or not stock, sales people, you'll get the most, you'll get $200. $200 is a lot. If you have the most automated workers, you get $200. There's 5 of these every game. It was so weird and felt tacked on to me because it's like I'm going to this game thinking about it as an economic game, trying to make my company run well. And then suddenly I got to like do these Euro-y feeling things where I'm like, well, I need this salespeople. It has nothing to do with the strategy I was going for, but $200 is a lot. So I guess I'll spend this turn just getting the salesperson. I don't really care about. I'll automate this section. I don't really care about just to get these end game goals. It just felt kind of weird that way too. The buildings that you collect to me feel random. I feel that those can be game changing. Sometimes you get a building, like Eric said, this is a butterfly effect. One decision can change how this thing goes. So sometimes you get a building, it's like, this is exactly what I want. These are the resources my company uses. Now I put that down and I have it. Or I could get building tiles that are not really useful to me, right? I feel like that has a big impact on the game. So there's that aspect. And if we keep going to like how I keep seeing a lot of rough edges in this game, let's talk about the rule book. I didn't care for the rule book in this game. It was, what this rule book felt like to me? It's like if you go to the, you like go to the grocery store and like you want to get like pita bread. So you go to the bread aisle to look for it and it's not there. And you find out it's because they put it in the international food section. It's like, wait, what? It's like it kind of makes sense, but it's not really expected.
In hindsight, it makes sense, but
it kind of does, but it really should have been the bread section. I don't know. That's kind of how this rule book felt to me. Every time I went to a section to find a rule, it was never in the section I thought it should be in. And that happened consistently. Like consistently, I would go in the rule book and like, no, it's not here. Where is it? Oh, it's way over here.
You know what's so weird about that, Greg, is that the playthrough on Heavy Cardboard praised the rule book. They said it was like the best rule book ever.
I don't know. I mean,
Interesting.
that's just my experience with it. I can only speak to my own experience.
Let me ask you something then. So let me give you a counter to this because I'm curious. High Frontier, right? Not elegant, very
No, you're right.
Lots of fiddliness because it was designed to recreate something very specific in a realistic way. Couldn't you make the argument that from a historical that it's trying to do the same thing with like a specific historical period? Or why do you not come away praising it the way you did High Frontier?
No, it's different. It's a very different thing. You're playing this for strategy. I mean, if you want to like really experience a stock market simulation, go out and get 1817. I mean, it's like this is not a stock market simulation. I don't think it's not like trying to recreate the Chicago. I mean, yes, it has theme in it. High Frontier has a lot of rules because it's trying to me, High Frontier is a learning experience. I'm going to High Frontier to learn about traveling through space, and I expect there to be a ton of rules for that. I'm not even really competing in High Frontier. I'm not trying to fight and to do things. This is a strategy game, right? So I'm not really paying attention to the theme, to be honest, when I'm playing this. I'm playing this for the puzzles. I'm playing this to, brain versus brain against my friends, like that's what I'm playing it for. And I feel like there's a lot of like these little fiddly bits and systems getting in the way of that in this game. Okay. And I just want to reiterate, I like the game. All of these things I'm saying, none of these are huge. None of these are like game breaking. It's just a compilation of all of these. I just felt like it could have been streamlined a little bit more. And the final thing I want to talk about, just to continue with that, was like even the components. I mean, like the salespeople and the managers are very similar in color when they're not next to each other. And the iron and the wood cubes, I was always confusing them. Like that's just something else. It's like a little tweak that could have just made the game a little bit better. The stock market, why does it go down when you go up? I don't understand that. It's just all these little things. If I were to like sum up everything that prevents this from being an amazing game to me, is I feel like it just wasn't developed enough. And for those out there who don't know what that means, game designers kind of get all the credit, kind of like authors of books do. But there's actually another person in between, like the editor, who will take the author's work and clean it up for publication. There's actually game developers. They're very underrated members of our board game society who take designers' work and clean it up before it gets published. And I kind of feel like this game was not baked long enough. And I don't know what went on behind the scenes here. That's just my impression of the game. So I think at the end of the day, this is an economic game for people who like Euro games. It's taking the idea of like your typical, what you think of as a Euro game. Like what did we review recently? Dune Imperium and Scythe and all these kind of games, these Euro games. And it's just, it complicates it more, adds more systems. So now you got more rules to like internalize. And then it kind of slaps this 1846 stock market around it. And boom, economic game. And it's fun. I enjoy it. I like Euro games too, but it's just, when I start comparing this with other economic games, it just falls a little short for me. And I just want to explain clearly why. But I don't hate the game.
Okay. Eric, what about you? Do you agree? Is it a half-baked game, or what did you not like about it?
I agree to a certain extent with some of the things Greg said. I do think that this is not a perfect game by any means. There are some issues with it, and I do feel like some of those issues are exactly what Greg mentioned. I will say that I agree with him that this is a economic game for people who maybe don't like economic games or Euro gamers. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I don't think that should be used as a pejorative. I think that for me, this game felt great to play. Probably
to be clear, I was not using that as a pejorative. Just want to be clear.
It kind of sounded like you were. The way it came off was I don't know. Anyway,
dismissive.
It was yeah. It felt a little dismissive.
Okay, well, I didn't mean that. I mean, I like Euro games too. I'm just saying.
Yeah, I know you do.
I guess because like this goes back to my original point, was I was coming in like this is an 18xx evolved. And
well, that's what I wanted to say. I think that's what happened. Yes, when you come in with that expectation, if you are a person who likes 18xx and you like the harshness of that, this game is not harsh. It's actually quite kind to you. And I do agree that because of that, there does feel like some things that, like, why would I ever withhold funds? Like, it's true. There are some aspects like that, because you're always going to have enough money to pay out dividends. But I found that whilst obviously there's some things that they could have trimmed off, I found the game extremely, like, much more welcoming than a game than harsher versions of a heavy economic game. So I really liked it, and I still felt like there was a ton of choices, a ton of hard decisions to make. And to your point, Micah, I think that was a very astute observation, because business was booming back in that time period. And so, of course, they had maybe that's why. I mean, maybe the designer designed for your company to be flush with money all the time based on a thematic principle. And if that's the case, then kudos to him. However, we're talking about the bad things. So I think there's plenty to say in this arena as well. And most of it's already been said by Greg, so I don't want to repeat that. Rule book is wonky. The board is a little wonky. I mentioned the art. The art is okay. The components, by the way, they're great. They're really, really thick. Really, really heavy, almost like wood. the board. But I would have liked it to be more dynamic. I would have liked to have felt like I was more in Chicago and not just playing a kind of a boring flat board. So a little bit of artistic direction would have been nice. I think this game might suffer if you're me playing this game and you wind up playing with an 18xx player, with somebody who thrives on the suffering and cruelty administered to others, then they might ruin this game for you, because the whole stock trashing thing, this game can. Maybe you don't want to play it with people who are willing to play aggressively. It's a valid strategy to play aggressively, but once one person plays aggressively, kind of it changes the whole dynamic for everybody. So that might be a bad thing, depending on your gaming group. But for my money, the thing that I hated the most about this game were the bonus tiles, and Greg mentioned them. This is one aspect of the tacked on thing that Greg mentioned, and to me it's the most egregious. These bonus tiles, man, why are they there? Everything else in this game makes total sense, but there's these little bonus tiles that get randomly dealt out that say, if you have the most employees, then you get $200 at the end of the game. If you have the most managers, if you have the most capital assets, you get $200 at the end of the game. And I was thinking, I'm not a sports guy, but I was thinking, what if this happened in like basketball? You know, what if all the rules in basketball are ostensibly to determine which team can put a ball in a net the most times under some fairly rigorous circumstances. Like, you've got to dribble. You can't just, for instance, you can't just pick up the ball and take it over to the net and put it in. You have to dribble it. There's rules mitigating how to put a ball in a net. But what if then on top of that, there was some random rule that said, if you happen to have more cheerleaders than the other team, you get 50 points. That wouldn't make any sense to me, and I think that it would be. I think there would be some backlash to that. Now, it would totally change the game, and it would mean that now NBA companies are going to be hiring more cheerleaders, because they want to make that extra points. And that's the way it is with this game. You end up with this rule that changes the way you play, but it doesn't seem to have anything to do with the point of the game. Like, maybe I make a choice to get more employees because I want that $200 when I can't even run my factories. Like, why would I do that? But it rewards you for doing it. So
That's a good
Anyway,
analogy.
to me, that's
I-
the
I-
best
I-
analogy I could come up with.
I do like that analogy. It's like you got whoever took the most steps in the game gets
Yeah.
5 extra points
Yeah.
in basketball, or
It
whoever
seems totally
touched the
like
ball the longest.
basketball's about. Yeah, you're right. If basketball's about
That's how it
putting
felt.
the ball in a net, it's not about these other things. They are associated with basketball. Cheerleaders are associated with basketball. Taking steps is associated with basketball. You shouldn't base points on it, and that's where I think these bonus
Well,
tiles are.
and
really
that's the
offensive
thing
to
though,
me.
is like if you did tell someone that you have to take the most steps, that means they now have to play their game more inefficiently because
Exactly.
they want that extra 5 points at the end of the game. Yeah, that's a great analogy. I do like that.
All right. Well, thank you guys for your well-researched thoughts on our good and our bad section. Let's go ahead and get into our final thoughts. Okay, let's go ahead and get into our final thoughts on City of the Big Shoulders. We're going to talk about whether you guys would recommend it, what you rate it, and does it go on our shelf. And with that in mind, at this point, we are on review number 26. We've gone through quite a few games, means that at this point we've kicked off 15 games off of our 10-game shelf. And so what we want to do moving forward is actually, because we're kind of worried that we're going to just end up with a set number of games on our 10-game shelf and nothing's ever going to make the cut anymore. We're going to introduce, for the first time in this video, another shelf, a 25-game shelf. And so that will allow us to talk about, for each game that we review, whether it's going to go on our 10-game shelf, be in our top 10. If not, would it still make the top 25 go on our 25-game shelf, or do we get rid of it completely? So with that in mind, let me ask you guys, I'll start with you, Eric. Would you recommend it? What do you rate it? And does it go on our 10-game shelf, our 25, or do we get rid of it?
Yeah, I would recommend this. I rated a 7.5, which is kind of a cursed number for me. 7.5 is it's what I rate games that I really, really love for some reason, but I can't find a way to rate it higher just with my rules, my rating system. I tend to really like 7.5 games apparently, because I think this is a great game. By the numbers, it comes out to 7.5, which doesn't sound great until you realize that my ranking system is a little different than everybody else's. I would put it on the shelf. I know Greg specifically mentioned that he doesn't like it better than Power Grid. I do. If it were me, I would bump Power Grid down to the 25 and put this one on the shelf. But I think that we should at least keep it on the 25. And I would recommend this to people who want to get into economic games, but maybe feel intimidated by the cutthroatness of maybe a full 18XX.
Okay. All right. Greg, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's a good game. I like it. However, I will say, because this game doesn't market itself as an 18XX, I do want to give some recommendations. If you're you're watching this video because you've heard that and you're looking for an 18XX that plays 2 to 4 players in 2 to 4 hours, then I would suggest 1889. It's not in print right now, but it keeps seeming like it's coming back in print soon-ish, so keep an eye out for it. However, if you do want an actual 18XX for Eurogamers, another game that I love because it is like that is 1846. That's a lot more. In fact, the stock market is pretty much directly lifted from it in City of the Big Shoulders. And it's much more of a build good companies. It's less stock trashing, more just run really good companies kind of a game. Really popular, easy to get because GMT publishes it. So 1846 is another good recommendation. So that's what I would say if you're looking for 18XX. Yep.
I tried to. I think City of the Big Shoulders is basically impossible to get right now too. I tried to. I think is it out of print?
Actually, I don't know. I don't know actually.
I tried to find. On BGG, it's listing eBay or no, not eBay. I think it was like 120 euros to get a copy.
Really? Oh, I didn't know that.
I don't. They might be sold out currently, so you might there might not be a lot of options for
Maybe,
that.
maybe. But you can play City of the Big Shoulders on BoardGameArena.com. It's on there. It's an official representation of it. But if you do like 18xx, you're interested in that genre, 18xx.games. I mean, it's like we're kind of in the golden age of online 18xx playing right now because they're implementing a lot of games on there. But anyways, those are just some options for you. So I also give this a 7.5 actually, which is pretty good. That's right up there where I would always be willing to play this, and I would pull this out with particular groups. And I think particularly because it is pretty zippy. I did recommend 1889 being like around 4 or less hours. But that's probably after you've played a little bit. The thing about City of the Big Shoulders that is nice is that it does play so fast. So yeah, 7.5. As far as the shelves go, I would definitely put it on the 25 game shelf. I do not believe in kicking out Power Grid for this. One, I like Power Grid better, and two, Power Grid is a lighter game, and I feel like our shelf's getting a little heavy. And the big deal with Power Grid on the 10 game shelf is it plays 3 to 6 players, which that player count is great.
No, yeah,
But-
I see the value of Power Grid. I just like it. I like City of the Big Shoulders better than Power Grid, and honestly, I think for some reason this game clicked so well with me. I find it maybe a little harder to play Power Grid than I do this game.
Really interesting. I think Power Grid's a much easier game to get into, but yeah, I think primarily though, just because it's lighter and it plays such a wide player count is why I would keep it on the 10 game shelf. But yes, this absolutely goes on the 25 game shelf. The question is, what do you want to kick off of it?
Everything's open.
I think the obvious choices are either Near and Far or Splendor. Both of those are right under a 6. So those are obvious first boot potentials.
Oh, I see. When you asked me, do I know what's on the 25 game shelf? I have to answer no now. I don't know. what
Every
what's
game
on
that
it.
we have
Did you
reviewed
post
is
this?
So I will have up
Oh,
right now a
everything
list
we've
of all
reviewed.
the games we
Everything that we have reviewed is on the shelf right now. So
I see.
Yeah, can you name
Well, let me just
all 26 games that we reviewed in the last
I can
year and
look at them.
a half? One of them was City of
Yeah,
the Big
let me-
Shoulders. Do you remember that one?
Let me just pull them all up.
I shouldn't be making fun of your memory. I'm the one with the bad memory here.
So let me see
And I
here.
will.
So everything's on there. All the stuff we kicked off is
everything's on
It's
there
on
again.
there.
Yeah. Yep.
okay. Okay. So what did you
So-
suggest?
I'm saying Near and Far or Splendor. Since those are both under a 6 for me.
Oh God. Yeah. Splendor was a 3 something for me.
Yeah. All right. Let's kick off Splendor. I think that's easy.
And, yeah, obviously. Yeah, and do it like in a really gory way, Micah, in the animation.
What was it when you'd have something that would go like, it wouldn't go into your graveyard, it'd go out of the game completely? Like that's what this is.
Yeah.
Oh, Exile. It goes into Exile.
Exiled. Yeah. So okay. So Splendor is our first game to get exiled.
This is that moment, Beers. Turn off the light show and prove to me you can beat me without.
To go to the
Hey,
Phantom Zone.
no
from which
love
they
for
will
Splendor.
return.
I didn't hate it that bad, but
Yeah. Okay. All right. To make room for City of the Big Shoulders. All right. So we're gonna have that now every time, a little more discussion, and get a little bit more of a well-rounded shelf going, at least on the 25 game shelf level. In the meantime, Greg, talk to us a little bit about the geek list.
yeah. So we are always kind of thinking about what we want to review next, and so we thought we'd give our few viewers a chance to have some input. So I'm going to put a geek list up on Board Game Geek. We'll probably seed it with a few games that Eric and I are interested in reviewing, but we're going to encourage people to go there, and if there's a game you would like to see us review, add it to the geek list. If the game you want to see us review is already on the geek list, thumb it up, and that will give us some direction as to when we think about what games we want to do next. If we see one game that has a lot of thumbs, that may sway our decision review that game first. So
Star Trek Monopoly.
no, you know they're gonna put it on there too. Now, don't
Yeah.
you? Just FYI, we are not obligated to review the highest thumb game. So no putting
I think if Star Trek Monopoly makes it, I think you're obligated. I think you're gonna have to.
It's
All
like
right.
who did the game reviews of and who was that? Somebody like started by reviewing Justin Bieber's backstage pass, like that was their thing. They played that frequently.
All right. Okay.
Yeah, anyways, we'll put the link in the description so you know where to get to that. So
Okay. So check out that link so you can have Greg and Eric review Justin Bieber's backstage pass and Star Trek Monopoly. And also stay tuned here at this channel to listen to Greg and Eric on their own standalone series that they each have, where they talk about things that are of interest to them. You can also check us out via podcast if you just want to listen instead of having to sit down and watch the video. So I think pretty much all the podcast platforms have us. So feel free to leave us a comment, like we said, give us a like, subscribe if you haven't, and thanks for watching. Until then, this has been A Piece of the Action.
okay, this is yesterday's Enterprise. I know the episode,
Indeed.
but I don't remember the name of the captain. I think
I want to say Harriman,
so. That
or do you know that name from somewhere else?
that sounds that name's familiar, but I think it's someplace else. So anything I'm just
Or
using
Castillo.
deduction in my head. I thought I remember it being a female captain, and I know it's not Tasha Yar, so that would make it B. If I recall correctly, but I could be wrong.
Micah, what do you think? Are you gonna go with Greg's near perfect record?
I'm as
Or go out
uncertain
on
with
your own.
I'm as uncertain about this one as I have been, though, because I don't honestly remember the captain
Do you remember this episode, Micah?
too well. I remember the episode. I just don't remember the captain too well.
This is one of the best episodes. Yesterday's Enterprise.
Yeah, it is a good episode.
Is this the one where? No, I don't.
So close.
Yeah.
Well, this is the one where they find an anomaly, and then out from the spatial anomaly comes a spaceship, and it's the Enterprise. And right as it comes out, everything on the current Enterprise changes. It just completely shifts, and they're like super warlike.
Was
and,
this the one where at the end they had like hundreds of Enterprises like popping into space all over the place
No, that was
from different
the
time streams?
final.
that was the
episode,
very
wasn't it?
end. That was
Yeah.
that was the final episode.
that was
That was all
Yeah,
good
yeah.
things.
Yeah.
No, yeah, it's just the one where because they saved the Enterprise C, they went. Well, spoilers, by the
Enterprise
way.
C wasn't
It wa-
there to stop to save the life of it was a Romulan attack on a Klingon vessel that
Yeah.
a Federation ship sacrificed itself in order to, so everybody on the ship's going to die.
Mhm.
And so they have to send it back, otherwise the timeline will change. But the cool thing about it, and the reason Tasha Yar is in this lineup, is because she never died in the reset timeline, and so
Right.
she's on the Enterprise when the ship comes through. She finds that out because Guinan has super time knowledge,
Mhm.
and so Guinan tells her that she's not supposed to be there, so she volunteers to go onto the Enterprise, and that turns into a whole nother episode.
Right. It was
later
like
on.
it was like a
Well,
whole episode that was an excuse for Denise Crosby to make a guest appearance. Right.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
Yes.
and she got 3 out of it.
Well, no,
She got
it was- I don't know if
3
that's-
episodes out of it.
Yeah, I don't know if that. It was a good episode. I mean, it was basically they went to war with the Klingons, right? They've
Yeah,
been
it
at
was
war
a
with the
Klingon
Klingons
thing.
for many, many, many years because of that sacrifice never occurring. So it was
Right.
one of those good, like, Star Trek-y moral dilemma: send them back to die or
Yeah.
Yeah.
live in our time
It
zone.
felt,
Kind
very,
of, but
it felt very like original series kind of moral dilemma
It
kind of
did.
thing.
it did.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I know it's not Tasha Yar. It's obvious, but I think for some reason in my head I'm thinking it's a female captain. That's why I'm going with the B. But I could be wrong there. Harriman sounds super familiar, but I can't figure out where that name is.
But I
coming
wonder
from.
if he might have been, because wasn't there one? No, there was. I forget. Well, I don't know. I'm gonna say Harriman at some point, but was
Harriman,
captain, I
okay.
thought, but maybe not in this episode.
Do you know Eric?
I do, and the reason I know is because this one stands out to me because my dad thought she was attractive, and her name was Rachel Garrett.
Okay, there you go.
So,
There you go.
choose the answer, B. Yeah.
Well, I'm
Yep.
going to look up Harriman. Do you know where Harriman comes from? That
I don't know.
sounds
I don't know
super
where Harriman
familiar.
comes from. Yeah,
What was
I
the name
know.
again?
I've heard it. John Harriman.
John Harriman. I feel like he was a captain of something else.
Yeah, they're always
This is why he's the captain of B.
Yeah.
He was the guy who, like, in Generations, he was the captain of the Excelsior class Enterprise.
yeah,
Oh.
that's
the,
where
the
that's
one where
where-
Kirk got sucked into the Nexus and all
Mhm.
that kind of stuff. He was
Okay.
he was like the lost years between Kirk and Picard, kind of.
yeah, he was the Enterprise B captain. So so there you go.
Okay.
And
All
if
right.
you're watching this, Dad, I apologize.